Hi, in this demo I'm going to talk about how I use Ableton Live with SonicPi and some of the things that it gets me that are not possible just using SonicPi on its own. So the first reason I started using Ableton Live was to host VSTs. VSTs just being software-based synths. Especially traveling and performing live, it's really useful just to be able to live in your laptop and have your laptop as your sole instrument. So that's where software synths really come into use, and you can get some really wonderful sounds out of them. So for example, I'm just going to grab one called Reactor. I'll load that in there. This is a really nice piece of software that has a lot of patches. One of the ones I use a lot is something called Form. This is granular synthesis using samples. In this example, I'm just going to load a predefined preset I have. Important thing to bear in mind is that all these controls, since this is software, are also controllable by MIDI CC signals, which means we can do everything from code. We don't need to open this up when performing, which is really powerful. So we set this to the IAC bus and channel 1. If you're asking what the IAC bus is, if you go to your MIDI Studio, is it MIDI Studio? Let's go to the MIDI Studio, you'll see the IAC bus. Yeah, there we go. So the IAC bus is usually off by default on Mac, and this is just our destination and our way of routing MIDI on the Mac. So you sometimes have to go and turn this on if it's not on by default, and then it will appear as a source in Ableton Live. So example here, I've got channel 1 and the IAC bus set. Let's just make some noise. So ignore most of this code for the moment. We're just going to go in with a simple core functions of SonicPi. Just send it a note. We said channel 1, send it to 1. Yeah, we have a really nice simple note. So these all helper functions. It's simply because this is a bit cumbersome. Live coding is about getting as fast as possible. So what I try to do is put just a helper function around this stuff. So I'm going to call this a Pong function, and this is really just going to wrap what we have here. There's some stuff going on, but at its heart, it's just doing exactly the same. It's sending a MIDI note velocity to channel 1. The other stuff that's going on here, it's simply adding a sensible default for velocity. I'm going to make this quite loud. So you can pass it in or have a default. This is just super useful for live coding fast, right? I can just do that and not have to worry too much, like that actually, about it picking some other default. There's some other stuff here that I'm not going to detail too much because we'll come back to. Just a little bit of stuff about parsing the options, and then we can kind of use those to control various aspects of the synth through MIDI CC signals. We'll come back to that, but first let's just put this into a live loop and get started after the tick. So let's just record it Pong, A2. So this is responsive to all this normal stuff, right? Like super simple. Let's create another one. So we're going to duplicate this one. Oh, bit of a clipping. Let's just change it to channel 2 for the moment. And for this example, I'm going to put some bass in just because this will help us explain some more stuff. So in this, I'm going to use Massive by Native Instruments. There's a nice stab sound I quite like. We'll grab bass, bass. And I can make this share the same channel so they will play the same note, which is pretty nice. So I'm actually going to leave that there. So these are both functioning off the same channel, but this one is going to run on a second channel. And then again, helper functions. I'm just going to go here, in fact, just grab this code. Let's call it a different name. Let's call it ping. Let's change the channel, channel 2. And now we have our ping C2. Alright, so this is just a really nice way of mapping all these channels. You have up to 16 of them, mapping them to various software-based synths. That's kind of my primary use of Ableton Live. One of the next things that's very powerful within Ableton Live, if you've done a lot of work with effects in SonicPi, what you're started to notice is this has really bad performance implications. Because within every live loop you create, there's no way of reusing these with FXs. So effectively every live loop that I have like this is just creating a new reverb and a new reverb and a new reverb. This is really inefficient because reverbs, echoes, they can be expensive, especially if you want a high quality one. So what Ableton Live enables us to do is just share these reverbs. So we kind of do something very similar as to what kind of Super Collider is doing behind SonicPi. We create this output bus and we put a big reverb on it that I've actually set. It's a really long one with a really nice high quality. And then using these A routings, we can route multiple audio sources through this reverb. So this has the effect of being efficient, as in this is a very CPU intensive reverb, but it's only run once. And it also gives us consistency, and then our sounds will all have a similar reverb feel to them. So let's just trigger off our loop again. And I'm just going to feed this into the reverb. And let's feed this one in a bit. Right, so these two channels are reusing this reverb. It's just very efficient. So that's a really nice trick. Next thing I want to cover is something I missed out at the beginning, but the MIDI CC channels. So we have a lot of functionality within Ableton Live, a lot of functionality within our synths to bind stuff to code. So for this example, I'm just going to grab a really simple audio effect that I like, and let's place it on one of the synths. So I'm going to grab, let's actually grab a delay. I quite like delays. Ping pong delay. Let's get something. Let's see. Let's get one of these nice delays. Let's just dump this there. No, actually, it's probably a better example. Let's go with the auto rec one for the moment. So delay is just a nice way of taking an audio signal and kind of taking a copy of it and playing it back a little bit later at a reduced level. So Les is going to add a little delay here. I'm going to solo this channel. This is so wonderful. The ability to turn live loops on and off is a real pain. Just by soloing this channel, I can turn off all the other instruments. It's really useful when trying to build a quite complex track, just to be able to listen into one live loop. And so we're going to bind the MIDI CC. We just click the MIDI option, and then we click the item that we want to bind, in this case the amount of this delay. And now it's just sitting there waiting for a C signal. So just hit a stop so nothing else gets run. And for the moment, I'm just going to call this directly. So it's going to be MIDI CC. I'm going to bind this to 100. I'm going to send it a value between 0 and 127. So just send it 0 for now, or 10 maybe. And the channel, I'm going to do this on channel 1 because this effect is on the same as Pong. So I'm going to kind of want to reuse channel 1 for all this information. Send the MIDI signal, jump into here. You can see it says 100, it's been bound. We also see the summary up here. This has been bound to amount. Now I turn the MIDI learning mode off. And now when I send these values, let's change it to 0. You'll see the amount drops down to 0. If I change it to 127, jump back, you see it's maxed out to 127. So through code, we can now change this dial. And again, I like to wrap things in helper functions. So rather than having this MIDI CC thing, I tend to have this MIDI function here, which is just a really nice way of creating mnemonics for all these different numbers. So I bound this to 100. So let's call this delay. So it's now just a way of I can call this delay and I can set a value, and the same thing, it's passing it through to a MIDI CC function that's sending the values to Ableton Live. I tend to put these MIDI CC calls into this function that's for the synth, just so I can add more parameters effectively. So now, add a bonus here, I can add a delay effect, and I can play around with the setting here. So that's a very heavy delay. Yeah, you see, I bind rather than 127 to 0, I bind these actually to 0 to 1. Just it's something I find efficient. So that's a very powerful delay. Let's see. Let's check I didn't... sorry, I just need to change this to MIDI CC FN. There we go, that's better. So our amount is really low. And this is where like texture can be really nice. So let's just create a ramp that goes between 0 and 1. Just make those fractional over 256 values. We start to get this really nice evolving texture where the delay is just slowly over time ratcheting up. You see as it gets more dramatic, boost this up a bit. This is a really powerful way of just creating nice texture. especially with delays, you can build a lot of tension as well. Let's bump it up a bit to make it a bit faster. We ramped it all the way up, so we could ring this. It's like that. Right, so that's really nice. Like, there is so much you can bind from these MIDI CC signals. You can just go wild. The next thing I want to cover is sidechaining, because it's really common in electronic music, and it's something that I struggled to do in SonicPi for a long time, and Ableton Live gives me this. So when I say sidechaining, what I mean is pushing down one audio signal based on another. So for this, we're going to grab some drums, because drums best express sidechaining. For drums, I'm actually going to use Contact. Just have, again, this is another bit of software, a virtual synth that has a bunch of presets. I'm just going to grab some stuff I'm familiar with that really fits with my sound. We could use samples here as well within Ableton, but I don't tend to. I tend to only use Ableton for software-based synth stuff. Let's just make this in on channel 3. There we go, we have some nice drums. Let's fire it off, and let's just put a kick in. So, A3, C3, channel 3. Right. I'm just going to move this up here for our example, our bass. Give that a bit of a longer sustain. Now what you'll notice is that the bass and the kick are fighting. They occupy the same frequency levels, they're both quite low, and it's muddy, very muddy signal. So this is where sidechaining comes in. We just go to the bass, we grab a compressor, audio effects compressor, and I'm just going to grab a drum kit compressor and put this on our bass. And then we just feed it the signal from our kick drums. And that is enough to do sidechaining. So let's kick that off again. So this is the kick coming in, and this is how much is affecting our bass signal. So I can do this very extreme. You can see the kick is totally pushing it down. You can just finding. So the kick is now a lot tighter, a lot clearer. It's not fighting with the bass line because the bass is getting pushed down just to avoid muddying the frequencies. And then turning that back on. Let's push that down then. What am I doing? That there. It's really simple, but it's so important not to get those muddied kicks and to really have them come through strong and clean. One of the last things I want to cover is the master output. So if you've used SonicPi, you're kind of used to getting a visual presentation of all of the audio getting put out. This is exactly what this is, except it's EQ based. So I grab this EQ8 and put it on my Ableton Live track. It gives me a way to visually inspect the audio. You can see I'm very heavy on the bass here. So what this also gives me the ability is to shape it. So I kind of have a mixer here. So I use this a lot when performing live. I can pull off the highs and the lows just if I'm a bit nervous about going over some of the effects. You know, I might want to pull it down a little bit around the lows and highs. But also for cutoffs, right? Like, right, it's really basic stuff, but is a really nice way of affecting the master audio output. And again, we can kind of put, let's see, we can put a lot of effects on this, like let's put a tube distortion, warm tube on it. Actually, hot tube is my favorite. And apply this to the master out as well. Just peaking a bit, so I'll just pull this down a bit. Right, we can really start to rip apart the signals and pull things in and out. Sorry, I get lost here, it's too much fun. So the final thing I want to touch upon is volume normalization. As you could see, I was actually peaking here, this was going red. This is a really nice thing to do in Ableton, is to inspect the volume. So let's just get this a bit higher grained. Where's my drag? There we go, get this as high. So for every single channel, we have a volume output. And you'll see actually some of these are peaking here when they've gone green. It means that actually the signal is too loud and it's distorting. You can kind of click these and it will take the highest value as you play your instruments. So what I do with this, let's just get this playing. See, you can see the red distortion here. This is really distorted. And you can see this one is actually peaking very, very loudly. And I suspect my adding my hot drive on it is really boosting the volume. But what I can do is then adjust the volumes and balance each of these synths. Let's just do it here. So this one's too loud. Now running at 7s. Let's keep that one down a bit. That one's pretty high. Right, so we're just balancing all the volumes in the mix so that they have space for each other and they don't peak on the master channel. So that's probably some of my basic usages of Ableton Live, the ability to share reverbs, to host and route virtual software-based synths. Lots of cool FXs, to be honest with you, in there that you can play with. This can all be bound to code, which is really nice for not having to leave SonicPi interface to mess around with parameterizations. Having really nice EQ settings, being able to visualize the sound, doing the sidechaining as well. These are all really basic stuff, but you'll have trouble doing them in SonicPi alone. In fact, some of them are impossible to do as of yet, like sharing FXs in SonicPi. And Ableton just opens this world to you and gives you a bunch of tools that are used in most electronic music. So if you have any questions or any problems, feel free to give me a shout. I hope that gives you some idea of why I use Ableton Live for SonicPi.